Continuing Chapter 5, Egyptian Temples, Gods, and Priests from the Dwellers on the Nile by E. Wallis Budge, The Life, History, Religion, and Literature of the Ancient Egyptians. AESTJYRTJT. Ost, and maybe even saw afterwards, because you had the egg, which is sometimes pronounced as saw. Weird sort of burp there, but okay. So right here. Ashtoreth, mistress of the horses and lady of the chariot. Nut. Sama. Nub. Warit. We have Adash, mistress of the entities, the Eye of Ra. Kunt, or Kunt Sa, Lady of Heaven. Asieth, a demoness of battle. Gods of the Egyptians, Volume 1, page 79, has this list that has a more complete list of what we're going over here. Bar, Baal, a demon of battle. Rishpu, a demon of war and of lightning. Well, an entity of war and lightning. Swoot, yeah. Swoot. Oh, Swootix. A Hittite entity of the same character as Set. The figures of these gods, well, they represent one's becoming in one sort of way, is that you can be connected to that aspect of yourself and that aspect of yourself and that aspect of yourself. There's certainly a psychological role with all this. Made of gold. The figures of these entities, made of gold, are silver, covered with a thick casing of gold, or bronze, inlaid with gold, or kept in small portable shrines, made in the shape of a large shrine, and provided with doors, which were closed and bolted, and sometimes sealed. When an entity desired to make a progress through a city or country, his shrine was brought about and placed in a boat, or some other sacred receptacle, and the priest carried it out of the temple into the street. So when you see those lines more like a boat, or you see a platform, a bigger platform under the symbol for a temple, that could be the case. You're out of the temple into the street. The shrine was followed by a large number of people of all sorts, besides the temple staff, and hymns of praise were sung by the priest and the choir of the temple, and probably many laymen joined in. The religious festival processions were highly appreciated by the populace, and when they were allowed to look upon the face of the entity, they rejoiced gladly, for healing of sickness and blessings were believed to follow in his train. And when a person's claiming to be a god, you have the same sort of darshan sort of thing in Indian or Indian-based concepts of faith, that, even seeing it is a blessing. But if you were to see a real spiritual vision, it is, but, just seeing some dude or seeing some statue, it can mean a spiritual context, of course. Isis Philah was carried through the country of Nubia once a year, so that women might present their petitions for offspring to her in person. A special barge was kept for the use of the entity when he wished to progress up or down the Nile, and the boat of the entity was a splendid construction, the barge of Ibn Athebs, called Usrhat. Oh, Usrhat. Was made of cedar wood and was 130 cubits, at least 200 feet, long, and was gilded all over. The cabin of the entity was made of fine gold, inlaid with precious stones, and was decorated with the heads of rams in gold, and its prow was in the form of a ras, wearing the crown of Osiris. The barge of Ptah of Memphis, called Neb Harah, was as long as that of Amun, and its cabin and steering poles were made of gold. Everywhere its approach was greeted with cries of joy and the sound of music. Now the double eight, with the twisted rope. This is the symbol of eternity, and the Tetragrammaton had its Egyptian forms before it passed on to Aramea and other such languages. Everywhere, and so that solar aspect, as you could say, connects to, it's connected to a series of entities, but everywhere its approach was greeted with cries of joy and the sounds of music. Some figures of the entities had movable limbs. Amenhotep chose Thutmose III as king by touching him with his hand. Amun of the oasis of Jupiter, Amun, by touching Alexander the Great with his hand, acknowledged him to be his son and the king of Egypt. Amun of Napta, selected from among the candidates for the throne of Nubia, the man he wished to be king by touching him with his hand. And Khensou, an entity of Thebes, showed that he approved of the journey of Neferhotep to Bekhten by nodding his head. On festival occasions, the so-called god was dressed by the priest, who placed crowns of gold on his head, an elaborate pectoral on his breast, cases made of gold on his fingers and toes, and symbols of his power in his hands. Now, the later Greeks were sort of experts in the priestcraft and making it look like, the voice called forth from the rock. They'd make it look like no one could get down in a place and have someone go hide there to answer the oracles. They'd figure out ways to move the statues around and stuff like that. The king, by virtue of his supposed divine origin, was in all periods of Egyptian history the high priest of some entity, and the priesthood was hereditary in many noble families. As a child and as a youth, the son of a nobleman usually occupied himself with duties which were not, strictly speaking, of a priestly character, and did not become a priest until he reached manhood. 15 or so. Early manhood. The ordinary servant of the temple was called servant of the entity, the Churham, and served under the direction of Mr, our overseer. The custody of the temple was generally in the hands of the overseer of the temple. And that thing on the Magical Egypt 2 where the guy shows up at the temple to be initiated, and they're like, they reject him. It's probably because people thought maybe I can, they'll look at who I am or something, and I may not be of their family, but maybe I can be a priest. It's like, or be trained. And it's like, yeah, they likely could have beat someone up out of the wilderness. Who said you could come here? Keriheb and his assistants performing magical ceremonies in order to effect the opening of the mouth on the deceased Hunnefer. The words of the book are given above in hieroglyphs on the stele behind Anubis, and the mummy is a prayer to Osiris for funerary offerings. And other orders of priests were supposed fathers of a god, the Cherioth, the Asperger, or Pure One, Wabnu, is that how you say it? The scribe of the holy book, it's the dude, it's the spitting water on top of a, shank. Oh, I hope that's water. The scribe of the holy books, you have the writer thing, and you have a Te. And the possessor of the book, Kurrah Bahab, i.e. the priest who arranged the order of the services and recited or sang parts of them. He was usually a man of great learning and was believed to possess magical powers. The Kurrah Bahab, who was mentioned in the Westcar papyrus, is said to have had the power of restoring to life a goose, the head of which had been cut off, and of dividing the water in the lake of two parts, and making the one part to stand on the other. One of Kurrah Bahab garments was the leopard skin, which conferred upon him the power to deal and treat with denizens of the underworld. Obviously that's a symbol of Osiris, right? Or some entities that they're going to give that to. But it's interesting. This is sort of kind of, you can say it's hinted at by, well, a lot of things can be connected to it, but in Surah 53, the Quran, there's the talk about the provider of Osiris. God is the provider of Osiris. Well, God is provider of of Sirius, the star. And aside from Isis, Osiris is, well, actually Osiris is a constellation. So, but people thought that Sirius was a provider that provided the Nile floods and some various other things. So, okay, that wasn't as relevant as I thought, but he was the chief performer in all the important magical funerary ceremonies, especially in those concerned the opening of the mouth, whereby the deceased resumed the power to think, talk, move, and walk, which he had enjoined upon earth. There are various grades among the ordinary servants of the entity, and a man might be the first or second, or third prophet of the god, and he might be a priest of several gods, prophet of Menu, prophet of Isis, prophet of Herer Nechtef. Under the New Kingdom, the priests of the temple were divided into classes, Sa'u, each of which was under a director. Oh, well, he is concluding the plural. Just say "u" when you got a plural. Each of which was under a director. Several of the "ui" when you got a double. Several of the priests who assisted in the funerary ceremonies in the temples had special titles. Sa Yurmurf. And the priest who undertook the duties in connection with the dead was called prophet of the Ka. The sort of astral call, the Hemka, or Kahem. Kahem. Notice how in Aramaic and Arabic and Hebrew, the Kahan is the access controlling priest. And often, as we see here, we got false prophets, but remember the Sa and the Sag. Sometimes it doesn't have the, but making sure to let you know that it's a singular by having that Y there, or just eh. Some will say it as a eh, because the long eh is the double line. So the son of Murph is how that breaks down. Under the new kingdom, a great many priests and servants of the temple of Imun-Ra at Thebes occupied themselves with the burial of the dead who belonged to their order, and coffins and funerary coffers. Usheptiu figures, scarabs, and all the miscellaneous objects that were considered necessary for the deceased in his tomb were prepared under the direction. Mummification was carried on under their care, and also were the painting and decoration of the coffins in which the priest and singing women of Yemen were buried. Probably some cats trying to get away from the wet outside. The influence of Yemen and its priest at Thebes was felt in every grade of society, and it culminated when Harhar, the high priest of Yemen, usurped the throne and founded the short-lived line of priest kings at Thebes about 1100 to 950 BCE. The same thing had happened about 2,000 years earlier, when the priesthood of Ra at Heliopolis succeeded in making 3 of their high priests the first 3 kings of the 5th dynasty. However numerous the official priest may have been in every temple, they were unable to direct all the services that had to be performed during the day and night. They were assisted in their work by lay priests. Some of these undertook to be present and to minister in the temple for a specific number of hours, and were called hourmen of the house of the entity. Women, what? Hutcher. Ooh. Well, we have a plural. Oh, the hourmen. Women, what? Ooh. Hutcher, yeah. And others served for a month at a time. These were with their wives and children, formed the population of the temple town, and were a sort of imperium in imperio, a state within a state. The reigning monarch was nominally their king, but the entity they served was their real king. The chief of the lay priest was the deputy of the entity, and his assistants formed both his court and council. The body of lay priests consisted of soldiers, sailors, handicraftsmen of all kinds, agriculturists, cattle breeders, merchants, etc., all of whom had made offerings to the common fund. But those who received wages from this fund were not called upon to make offerings. Most of the manual labor required by the lay priests was provided by their slaves, who were very numerous, some temples possessing as many as 682. Ramses III states, I forget how you say third, but well, there was other parts of the name, Ramses III for short, right? In the Harris Papyrus, number 1, that in the course of the 31 years of his reign, and gave to the temples of Egypt 113 know what that sound over there was. Maybe bird on the roof? No. Maybe. Ramses III states in Papyrus number 1 that in the course of the 31 years of his reign, he gave to the temple of Egypt 113,433 slaves, and the staffs of the various temples enumerated by him in the same document consisted of 5,811 persons.